Let's take a look at one of the most powerful and flexible logging libraries for Node.js, Winston. This is going to help you implement professional grade logging in your Node applications today. You can drop all of that console logging mess and you can move to nice, clean, structured logging with tons of flexibility. Let's take a look. All you need to get started is the Winston package, so go ahead and install that using your package manager of choice. These days I would be recommending pnpn or bun though. Once that's installed, the recommended way to use Winston is to create your own logger. We can do this by importing Winston first from the Winston package. Then we go ahead and do winston.create-logger like this, and we provide it with some options. We'll start out with some basic ones. I've set the level here to info. This is the maximum level of messages that a transport should log. So if this is set to info, we're not going to see anything like debug sent out to the console. The best way to configure this though is with an environment variable. This just means that you can go ahead and change this on the fly and you don't need to make any code changes when you want to go ahead and see some more detailed logs. Then we have the format, and as you can see, I've set that to winston.format.json. I highly recommend you start using JSON logging. We actually have a video on logging best practices. You should check that out after this and subscribe for more great content like that. It is actually the default in Winston as well, but you do have other options like simple and CLI, which might be a little bit easier to read in local development, but I highly recommend you leave that on as JSON in production. And then the last line here is our transports. And as you can see, I've set up an array and we just have one item in there of new winston.transports.consoles. This is essentially where are we sending our logs to. And at the moment, we're just going to send our logs to the console, but we'll set up some file-based logging later. So that's all we need to get started. So we can go ahead and start to use our custom logger now. As you can see down here, we've got two functions. One of them is logger and then the log level you want to use. So in this case, info, and then just the message that you want to print out. Or you can go ahead and just use the generic logger.log, and then you provide the level as a string for the first argument, and then the message for the second argument. So let's see what this looks like in a terminal. So I'll go ahead and run that basic application that we just created, and I'm actually going to pipe it through JQ here. This just means that my console is going to go ahead and format that JSON for me so it's nice and readable. But if we hit enter, as you can see, we've got those two log messages that we just set up, and it looks nice and structured. So you can see we've got the level, and then the message, and then the level of the info, and then the hello world again from those two different functions that we used. This is great, but let's look at how we can add more information to it. Winston actually supports the addition of metadata to log messages. Now you can just pass an object into the function that we called earlier with the metadata that you want to attach to each of the logs. But you can see if we were setting something up for, say, a checkout service and we wanted to attach that to all of our logs so we could go ahead and search and filter them later, it'd be a bit tedious to add this to every single one. We check out what this looks like in a console though. You can see it simply just appends that there as a key onto our log JSON that we got out earlier. So it works well, but as I mentioned, it's going to be a little bit tedious, so we can definitely do better. If you want some global metadata, something like the service name, for example, we can actually configure that on the logger that we set up earlier itself. And you do that using this default meta key here. So if I take the service name out of the individual log message, I can just paste this up here and hit save. And now all of our logs going forward that are set up with this logger, they will go ahead and have that global metadata on it. So if I go ahead and run the application again, you can see we've still got that checkout service there, despite the fact that it doesn't actually have that object in the logger info itself, but it's set up as our default metadata on the entire logger. Another useful way to add metadata to your logs is by creating a child logger. This is really useful if you want to add certain metadata that should be added to all of the log entries within a specific scope. So say I have this function of hello world here. I'm going to go ahead and set up a child logger within this. And all we need to do for that is do logger. So it's going to use the logger we created earlier. So it should still have the service on it. And then we do .child, and we can pass through an object of the metadata that we want on this child logger. Then within the hello world function, I can go ahead and use the child logger instead of the main logger. And this is going to go ahead and have this request ID attached to it. So we go ahead and see what this looks like in a console. If I run my application again, you can see that we've got that first log message that just has that global metadata of the service name. And then in the second one, we still have that service name metadata, but we also have our request ID that was called from that hello world function. So you can see that metadata is going to be really useful if you want to go ahead and search your logs and find all of the entries that pertain to a specific request or a specific service, for example. So that's the basics of configuring and using Winston for logging, but let's take a look at how it handles errors, as I think this may actually confuse some when they first set it up. As you can see here, I'm going to do logger.error and then throw a new error within that log message. By default, it's actually not going to log anything with this error. So if I go ahead and run this application now, what you can see is we just get the level saying error, we get the service, and we get the timestamp, but we're not getting anything off of that error object like its stack trace or the message itself. Luckily, we can fix this issue by changing our format again. As you can see here, I've added in the errors, and again, errors is just coming from Winston.format up here using this object syntax, and then inside of the errors, I've actually configured it so that it shows stack traces. So now if I go ahead and view this in a console, what you see is it's a little bit more useful. We're getting that message out of the error, and then we're also getting the stack trace itself. So I think most of you are going to want to do that. On the topic of errors, Winston also provides the ability to catch and log uncaught exceptions and promise rejections. To do this, we can actually configure Winston to log these errors to specific transports. So this is a really good time to set up file-based logging. As you can see here in this setup, I've changed out the transports here for .file. So this was previously .console, but now we're going to be logging all of our messages to a specific file, and that file name is going to be called standard.log. But what we have down here is an exception handlers and rejection handlers, and again, this is an array of the transports where we want to send these messages to. What this means is we have an uncaught exception in our code. It's going to go ahead and log that specifically to the exception.log, and the same thing goes for an unhandled promise rejection. So if I scroll down here, we have two messages. We're going to have logger.info of hello log file. I expect that to go to the standard.log file, but then I'm just going to throw an error in my code anywhere. I'm not try catching this with any log, but hopefully now that we've added this exception handler here, Winston should go ahead and pick that up anyway. So let's run this code. So if I hit enter on the same command we've been using, what you'll notice is we get no log messages out to the console anymore, and that's because we set up the transport to be the file, so our messages should be in there instead. Back in our project files then, you can see it's created the log files that we configured. So we've got a standard.log, and then inside of here, we've got that message that I sent out to the logger of hello log file. So this standard.log was handling any log messages that aren't an exception or a rejection. Then if we go inside of the exception.log, we should have that uncaught exception. And as you can see there, we've got our JSON formatted log configuration that we set up, and then we've got a message of uncaught exception, and then the stack trace as well. So this is super useful if you want to add some organization so that if you do have any exceptions, you can go ahead and find them really quickly. I'll actually leave a link in the description down below of a blog post that we have on Winston if you want to take it a bit further with some more customizations and set up cool things like log file rotation and a whole load more. But before you do that, the last thing I'm going to show you is how we can use Winston to centralize our logs. This is really useful if you have a load of individual servers and microservices, as it's really beneficial to centralize your logs in one place so that you can get a complete picture of any issue across all of your systems. And of course, a great tool to do this is BetterStack. BetterStack is the fastest log search on the planet. It's going to give you a super nice UI, so you can go ahead and query your logs really quickly, find out what the issue is, and get it resolved as quick as possible. Best part is, all you need to do is get started with a free account. Once you signed up, you're going to want to go to the dashboard, go over to telemetry and then sources, and we'll click connect source. Give it a nice and friendly name. I'm going to call mine Winston demo. And then down in platform, we're going to go over metrics, logs and metrics, and we'll scroll down to logs here. We're going to then select JavaScript and Node.js, and then we'll hit connect source like this. Once you've done that, you should get a source token, and we're going to want to go ahead and save that for later. For the next few steps, I'll be following our documentation, so I'll leave this linked in the description down below. But as you can see, we need to install a few packages, and that's going to be these ones here. So I'm going to head over to the console. I'm going to use pnpm to install this, and then we'll add that into our project. With those packages installed, you're going to want to import logtail from the logtail/node package, and then logtail transport from the logtail/Winston package. Then you need to create a client. To do that, you can say something like logtail equals new logtail, and then this is your BetterStack source token. So this is the one I told you to copy earlier, and I would highly recommend storing this in an environment variable, as this is something you want to keep secret, and make sure it's only on the server as well to avoid leaking that. Then inside of our Winston configuration here, we can add in a new transport into the array. So here we have new logtail transport, and then you pass in the logtail client that we've configured up here. Finally, once you have a few messages, it's a good thing to do logtail.flush, just to ensure that all of your batched logs have been sent to BetterStack, especially useful at the end of the application. With that code set up, if I go ahead and run my application a few times so that we generate some log messages, if I head over to BetterStack, we should be seeing them in a nice centralized place. Back on betterstack.com then, where we configured our source, you can now click Livetail, and you should see your log messages are starting to come through. And as you can see, I ran my application a few times, so we're getting that hello BetterStack message. And you see at a glance here, we've got the level and the application name and the timestamp as well. And you can even expand this to see a bit more information. And you can do things like adding this to your query or defining metrics just based on that information, so you can really dig in and find out the specific issue. So it helps you get it resolved as quick as possible as well. And that's just a fraction of what BetterStack can do to help you, so I highly recommend you check it out. And there you go. Hopefully you can see the power of a great logging package like Winston. It really helps you out when making production grade applications. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments down below, and as always, see you in the next one.